The evening was calm when the black executive stepped out of the black car in front of the hotel. The city lights reflected on his polished shoes as he adjusted his tie and took a deep breath. He had traveled a long way for this trip. The hotel he was about to enter was not an ordinary place. It was known for serving the richest, the most powerful, and the most famous people in the world. Celebrities, politicians, and business leaders walked through those glass doors every single day. But tonight, it would be him. He carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need to shout. His suit was cut perfectly. His watch shimmered under the lights, and in his hand, he held a simple wallet. Inside that wallet rested the card that spoke louder than any word. A black card. A card so rare and so exclusive that only the wealthiest of the wealthy could even dream of having it. For him, it was just another tool, like a phone or a pen, but for others. It was a symbol of unimaginable status as he pushed the revolving glass door and entered the grand lobby. The air was filled with a cool scent of fresh lilies. Golden lights sparkled from the chandeliers above, and a pianist played soft music in the corner. Guests lounged on velvet chairs, sipping wine, dressed in silk and diamonds. Everything screamed of luxury and wealth. Yet, when he walked in, some heads turned. Not out of admiration, but out of curiosity, and for some, quiet disbelief. He walked toward the reception desk, his steps steady and calm. Two receptionists stood there, busy with other guests. One of them, a young woman, noticed him first. She looked him up and down quickly, her eyes lingering longer than they should have. For a second, her smile faltered, then returned. But not with warmth, more with doubt. The executive didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. He had seen those looks before, in airports, in restaurants, in boardrooms. He had grown used to people silently questioning if he really belonged. But he wasn't here to explain himself. He was here to check in. He placed his wallet on the marble counter, opened it, and slid the sleek black card forward. The shiny surface caught the light, making it gleam like a small blade. For him, it was routine. He had used it countless times, from private jets to fine dining. But for those who didn't understand, it was something almost unbelievable. The receptionist picked up the card, her fingers hesitating as though it were too heavy. She looked at it, then at him, then back at the card. A small smile crept across her face, but it wasn't the polite smile of service. It was the smile of someone holding back laughter. She leaned slightly to the side, whispering something to her colleague. He chuckled under his breath, covering it quickly with a fake cough. The executive noticed this time. His sharp eyes caught everything, the exchange of looks, the curl of lips, the half-hidden laugh. He didn't react. His face stayed calm, his voice steady when he spoke. Checking in. "The reservation is under my name." He said it politely, without anger, as though he hadn't seen anything. But he had. The receptionist typed slowly on her keyboard, her smirk growing. Guests nearby noticed the slight change in tone. They heard the faint laughter. They saw the disbelief written on her face. To them, it seemed like a scene that didn't belong. A man like him, in this hotel, with a card like that. The executive kept his hands folded, his eyes straight ahead. Inside, memories flickered. He remembered the first time someone doubted him when he was younger, telling him he would never succeed. He remembered being ignored in meetings, spoken over, treated like he was invisible. And now, even at the height of his success, with billions under his control, the laughter still followed him. But unlike before, he no longer carried anger. He carried patience. And patience, he knew, was stronger than rage. The pianist in the corner played a soft note. The golden clock above the lobby ticked steadily. The receptionist returned the card to him, still with that trace of doubt in her eyes. She didn't yet realize who she was speaking to. Didn't know that the man standing before her had the power to change the future of her very workplace. The executive thanked her calmly and waited. His voice deep but controlled. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. His presence filled the space, not with noise, but with quiet authority. And though the people around him didn't know it yet, the story that was about to unfold in that lobby would shake not just the hotel, but the world of business itself. That first moment, the arrival, the laughter, the silence was only the beginning of something far greater. Something no one in that lobby could have ever imagined. The sound was soft at first, just a small giggle. The kind of laugh people make when they think no one is listening. But in the grand silence of the hotel lobby, it was enough to cut through the soft piano notes. The black executive heard it. Everyone nearby heard it. And though the voice was low, the insult behind it was loud. The receptionist held the card between her fingers as if it were a toy. Not the most exclusive card in the world. She tilted it, squinting at it with fake confusion, then looked at her coworker. That was when the second laugh came sharper this time. The young man beside her tried to hide it with a cough, but his shoulders shook. His lips betrayed him. The executive stood perfectly still. His face gave away nothing. His eyes stayed calm, almost too calm, like the surface of deep water hiding a storm. He didn't flinch. He didn't demand. He just let them laugh. But his silence wasn't weakness, was power. He was watching, memorizing every smirk, every whisper. Behind him, a couple seated on a velvet sofa turned to stare. They exchanged curious glances, whispering to each other. To them, it looked like a scene that didn't make sense. A man dressed in elegance, holding a black card, yet being mocked as if he were pretending. The woman raised her brows. The man shook his head. They weren't sure if they should feel pity or embarrassment for him. The receptionist finally spoke, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Sir, you're saying this is your card?" She gave a quick laugh, as if she were humoring a child. "We don't see many of these here." "They're rare, very rare." Her words carried the kind of disbelief that was heavier than an insult. The executive replied softly, his tone steady, his words controlled. "Yes, run it." The receptionist blinked, her smirk faltering just slightly. But before she could turn to her screen, the young man beside her leaned closer and whispered something in her ear. She laughed again, covering her mouth with her hand, pretending to adjust her hair. The sound echoed in the grand lobby like a slap. Guests at the bar turned their heads. The pianist's fingers faltered for just a moment on the keys. The tension grew thick, like invisible smoke. Everyone could feel it. Something wasn't right. Something heavy was in the air. The executive's assistant, standing a few feet behind, clenched his fists. His jaw tightened, his face burning with frustration. He wanted to step forward to defend his boss, to remind these hotel staff exactly who they were speaking to. But the executive raised his hand slightly without turning back, a silent command. "Stay quiet. Let it happen." And so, the laughter continued. The receptionist tapped slowly on the keyboard, dragging out the process, acting as though she was doing him a favor. "You know, sir," she said with mock politeness, "these kinds of cards usually belong to a different type of guest. We just need to make sure everything is real." Her coworker snorted under his breath, unable to hold it in. The executive's lips pressed into a thin line. His calm eyes flicked from the receptionist to the man beside her, then back to the glowing chandeliers above. He had heard this tone before in meetings where people doubted his intelligence. In gatherings where they assumed he was a bodyguard instead of the CEO. In dinners where people asked if he was really supposed to be there, and every time he had answered not with anger, but with action. Now, in this moment, the laughter grew louder in his head. Not because of the sound, but because of what it meant. It wasn't just doubt, it was disrespect. A bold assumption that he didn't belong. That his presence in this hotel, at this counter, with this card, was a mistake, but it wasn't a mistake. The guests around began to sense something bigger was unfolding. Phones were lowered, conversations stopped. The soft music felt out of place now. All eyes shifted toward the executive and the two laughing clerks. People didn't know who he was yet, but they felt the weight of his silence. They could see the storm building behind his eyes. Still, he didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't explain himself. He simply let them laugh because he knew something they didn't. He knew who he was. He knew the power he held. And he knew that soon, very soon, the very people mocking him would regret every single giggle at that moment. The receptionist laughed again, sliding the card back toward him without running it. "Sir," she said, her voice patronizing, "perhaps you'd like to use another method of payment. Something a little more realistic?" Her words sliced the air like a knife. The executive looked down at the card, then slowly lifted his eyes back to her. His silence was terrifying, but she didn't understand why. She thought she was in control. She thought she was entertaining the staff and amusing the guests. She didn't realize she was standing on the edge of a billion-dollar disaster. The laughter had started as a giggle, but soon it would echo into something much bigger, something that would break headlines and crush reputations. For now, though, the executive let them laugh, because he knew the next move was his, and it would silence them forever. The receptionist leaned forward on the marble desk, her polished nails tapping lightly against the counter. She slid the black card back toward him, not with respect, but with a smirk that curled at the corner of her lips. Her voice carried across the lobby, louder now, as if she wanted people nearby to hear. "Sir," she said, drawing out the words slowly, "we really do need to confirm if this card actually belongs to you. You understand, don't you? These kinds of cards are very rare." The way she said it wasn't about policy. It wasn't about routine. It was about doubt. It was about putting him in his place. The young man beside her chuckled again, shaking his head as though the scene itself was a comedy show. "Yeah," he added under his breath, but loud enough to sting. "We don't get many of these. Unless they're fake." The word hung heavy in the air. Fake. The executive stood tall, his shoulders straight, his face calm. But inside, the insult dug deep, not because he needed validation, but because it wasn't the first time he had heard it. The assumption that his wealth, his success, his very identity had to be an act. He didn't flinch. He didn't show anger. Instead, he reached forward, his hand resting gently on the black card still lying on the counter. His movements were slow, deliberate, filled with quiet power. "Run the card," he said again, his voice steady, almost too steady. But the receptionist didn't move. She folded her arms, her chin tilting slightly upward, her eyes narrowing at him. "We just want to be careful, sir," she said, her tone dipped in fake sweetness that hid the edge of mockery. "Sometimes people pretend. And, well, this hotel has certain standards." The word standards hit like a slap. Around the lobby, heads turned more openly now. Guests who had been whispering behind their hands leaned forward to watch. Even the pianist paused for a split second, missing a note, before continuing with shaky fingers. The executive's assistant, still standing behind, stepped forward this time. His voice cracked with frustration as he spoke. "Do you even realize who you're talking to? Do you have any idea?" But before he could finish, the executive raised his hand again. A calm, silent command. "No. Stay quiet." The assistant froze, swallowing his words, though his anger burned in his eyes. He wanted to shout the truth, to force them to understand the power of the man they were laughing at. But the executive didn't want that. Not yet. The receptionist smirked again, her voice carrying an even sharper edge now. "Sir, If you don't have another method of payment, perhaps this isn't the right hotel for you. We do have other options in the city, more affordable ones. The words landed like a blade, twisting in the gut. Not just questioning his wealth, not just doubting his status, but openly suggesting he didn't belong there at all, that this place was too good for him. The insult was no longer hidden in laughter. It was spoken out loud. For a moment, silence filled the space. The executive didn't answer. He didn't move. He simply looked at her, his gaze calm, steady, piercing. His silence was louder than any shout could have been. It stretched across the lobby. Mimi, even the other guests, feel the weight of it. The young man beside her, sensing the quiet tension, leaned back in his chair with a grin. Maybe he just found the card somewhere, he muttered, pretending it was a joke, but meaning every word. That was when the insult grew too sharp to ignore. People nearby gasped softly. A woman at the bar covered her mouth. A man whispered, "They don't know who he is." But the staff didn't stop. The receptionist placed her hands on the desk, leaned closer, and said in a low voice meant to cut, "Sir, we deal with real cardholders every day. If you want to avoid embarrassment, perhaps it's best to just walk away quietly." The executive didn't blink. He didn't argue. He didn't explain himself. He simply lifted the card again, holding it between two fingers, and placed it gently back on the counter. "Run the card." His words were calm, but each syllable carried iron. For the first time, the receptionist's smirk faltered. Something in his tone, something unshakable, made her pause. The young man stopped laughing. The air thickened around the lobby. The guests watched with wide eyes. They didn't know yet, but they felt at this moment was the turning point. The insult had been delivered. The wound had been opened. And now, the answer, the revenge, the reckoning, was coming. The insult had been simpled out, disrespect, mockery. But soon, they would realize it was an insult that cost far more than they could imagine. And the man standing before them, silent but unshaken, was about to prove it. Asterisk the silence after his last words lingered in the air like smoke. "Run the card." The receptionist swallowed hard, the playful smirk fading for the first time. She glanced at her coworker, who had stopped laughing. Something in the executive's tone, calm but unshakable, made them uneasy. Still, pride pushed her forward. She pressed a few keys on the computer, sliding the card into the machine as if she were proving a point. The machine beeped once. A light flashed green. Approval. The system displayed the guest's reservation, penthouse suite. Booked weeks in advance, paid in full. The receptionist froze. Her eyes darted over the screen. She scrolled down and saw the details: company name, global executive status, security arrangements, a Tina note written in bold letters, VIP client. Handle with extreme care. Her lips parted, but no words came out at that exact moment. The hotel's manager walked briskly into the lobby. He had been alerted about the guest's arrival hours ago. His face brightened when he spotted the man at the desk. He hurried forward, his voice rising with nervous energy. "Mr. Carter." The manager said, almost breathless. "Welcome, sir. Welcome. We've been expecting you. I apologize for not greeting you sooner. The board has been preparing for your meeting tomorrow." He extended his hand, his tone overflowing with respect. The receptionist's heart sank. The coworker's grin collapsed into pale shock. The name rang in their ears. Mr. Carter, the black executive they had mocked, was none other than one of the most powerful CEOs in the world, the head of a corporation valued in the tens of billions. His name appeared on magazine covers, business headlines, and financial reports across the globe. His company wasn't just successful, it shaped industries. And now, he stood silently in front of them, watching. The manager noticed the tension. He looked at the two employees, then at the executive. His expression shifted as he pieced it together. The receptionist's flushed face, the smothered laughter, the long delay, all made sense. His chest tightened with dread. He had made the worst mistake a hotel could ever allow. Disrespecting the wrong guest, sir. The manager stammered, "I please forgive any misunderstanding. It won't happen again. We are honored to have you here." His voice cracked slightly, betraying his panic. He turned sharply toward the staff. His eyes burned with silent fury, a warning of the storm waiting once the guest left. The executive finally moved. Slowly, he lifted the black card from the counter and slipped it back into his wallet. His movements were precise, deliberate, like a judge delivering a sentence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't scold. He didn't have to. His silence weighed heavier than any words. The receptionist's hands trembled. She wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain, but what excuse could she give? That she thought someone like him couldn't possibly belong in this hotel. That his skin, his presence, didn't fit the picture in her mind of a real billionaire. No apology could erase the insult. Guests in the lobby who had been whispering moments ago now sat in stunned silence. Some recognized the name immediately. One man gasped and muttered, "That's the Carter Corporation CEO. He's worth more than this entire hotel chain." Another guest whispered to his companion. They laughed at him. They didn't know who he was. The pianist stopped playing altogether, his hands hovering above the keys. He wasn't sure if the silence was heavier with shame or suspense. But it demanded stillness. The manager gestured nervously toward the elevator. "Mr. Carter, please, your suite is ready. We have prepared everything to your liking. Anything you need, anything at all, is yours." His voice was almost pleading, but the executive didn't move. He stood there, still and composed, his eyes fixed on the two employees who had dared to laugh. His gaze wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was worse. It was cold, measured, and unforgettable. It was the gaze of a man calculating, deciding, shaping a response that would not be immediate, but would be final. The assistant behind him clenched his jaw, watching the silent exchange. He knew his boss well enough to recognize the expression. This wasn't going to end at the reception desk. Something much larger was already forming in the executive's mind. The receptionist finally broke. "Sir, I didn't mean to," she began, but her voice cracked. The executive lifted his hand slightly, and she froze. He hadn't said a word, but the gesture was enough to silence her. The manager's forehead glistened with sweat. He forced another smile, his voice trembling. "Mr. Carter, perhaps we can escort you directly to your suite," but the executive spoke for the first time since the manager arrived. His voice was deep, steady, and final. "Not yet." The two words cut through the air like steel. The manager's smile collapsed. The staff stiffened. Everyone in the lobby leaned in closer. For the first time, the hotel understood the weight of what had just happened. This was no ordinary guest. This was not a man to laugh at, to insult, or to underestimate. This was a man whose decisions could move markets, whose choices could erase entire partnerships in a single phone call. And though no one knew it yet, in less than 24 hours, the laughter at that desk would cost the hotel $2.8 billion. Asterisk, the lobby had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your chest. The staff stood frozen. The guests whispered in disbelief. And the manager kept bowing, his nervous smile stretching too wide, too forced. But the black executive, Mr. Carter, remained calm. His stillness was scarier than shouting, scarier than anger. It was the silence of a man planning his next move. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The glow of the screen lit his face as he swiped with precise fingers. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't flustered. He moved with the steady patience of someone who knew exactly what he was about to do. The receptionist's stomach twisted. The young man beside her finally stopped smiling. A chill crept up their spines as they watched him press a number. They didn't know who he was calling, but they sensed it wouldn't end well. The phone rang once, twice, and then a voice answered. Calm, professional. It was his legal advisor. Mr. Carter, is everything in order? The entire lobby could hear his side of the conversation. His voice was low, steady, but each word dropped like a stone in still water. Cancel it, he said simply. There was a pause on the other end. Cancel, sir? The deal with yes, Carter said, cutting him off. The hotel partnership. $2.8 billion. Effective immediately. The words echoed through the lobby. $2.8 billion. Guests gasped. The manager's face drained of color. The receptionist nearly dropped the tablet she was holding. The young man at the desk staggered back a step as though struck. The advisor on the phone sounded startled. Are you certain, sir? The bored Carter's tone never shifted. This establishment has shown me exactly how they treat people they don't understand. There will be no partnership. Draft the termination. Announce it tomorrow morning. He ended the call with a single swipe, slipping the phone back into his pocket. No drama, no raised voice, no explanation. Just a decision that cut deeper than any argument could. The manager nearly fell over his own words. Mr. Carter, please. This must be a misunderstanding. Surely we can, but Carter turned his gaze on him, steady and cold. He didn't need to say anything. The look alone told the manager everything. It was done. There was no saving it. The receptionist's hands shook. Her throat tightened as she finally understood the weight of her laughter, of her insult. She hadn't just mocked a man. She had destroyed a deal that entire teams of executives had spent months negotiating. She had cost the company more money than she could even imagine. Guests in the lobby whispered louder now, their voices buzzing like bees. Did he say $2.8 billion? He canceled it. Just like that. Who is he? But Carter didn't care about their whispers. He cared about something greater. For years, he had fought battles no one had seen, boardrooms filled with doubt. Meetings shadowed by prejudice. Partnerships that looked past him because of who he was. Tonight was different. Tonight he had been mocked openly, in public, in front of strangers. And this time, he wasn't just going to let it pass. The decision wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. Respect was priceless. And they had tried to strip it away from him with laughter. He turned to his assistant, who stood trembling with a mix of anger and awe. We're leaving, Carter said softly. The manager stumbled forward. Sir, please, we'll offer anything. The penthouse suite, complimentary services, personal apologies from our board, but Carter didn't stop walking. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing through the hollow silence of the lobby. The assistant followed quickly behind him. Carrying the briefcase that now held the weight of an empire's decision, the receptionist called out desperately. Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Carter didn't even glance back. The revolving glass door opened before him. The night air brushing against his face as he stepped out. Behind him, the hotel stood heavy with shame. Inside, staff whispered. The manager buried his face in his hands. And guests exchanged stunned looks. The decision had been made. With a single phone call, the deal was gone. The headlines were already writing themselves. By the next morning, the world would know. The laughter of two employees had cost their company $2.8 billion. And Carter. He walked away without a hint of anger on his face. Because true power doesn't need to shout. It simply acts. The morning after felt like a storm had swept through the business world. The sun rose over the city, but inside the hotel's headquarters, it was darker than ever. Phones buzzed endlessly. Emails poured in like waves. And every screen flashed with the same headline: Black executive cancels $2.80. Billion deal after hotel disrespect. It spread everywhere: financial news channels, social media feeds, international papers. Hashtags exploded across the internet. People weren't just reading the story, they were sharing it, debating it, and tearing the hotel's reputation apart piece by piece. At first, some readers couldn't believe it. $2.8 billion. Over a laugh, they questioned. But as more details emerged, the card, the insults, the humiliation, it became clear. This wasn't about money. It was about dignity, about respect, about the price of prejudice. The receptionist who had laughed was now nowhere to be seen. Rumors swirled that she had been fired on the spot. The young man beside her, gone as well. But it didn't matter anymore. The damage had been done, and no amount of firings could erase what the world had seen. Inside the hotel's boardroom, panic reigned. Executives shouted over each other, their ties loosened, their foreheads wet with sweat. The CEO of the hotel chain slammed his fist on the table. "Do you realize what this means?" he barked. "Our biggest deal in years gone. Years of negotiations destroyed in one night." Another executive whispered, almost in fear, "And it's not just the money. Investors are pulling out. Our stock is already falling. Other partners are questioning us. They don't want to be tied to this scandal." The room fell silent. Each person knew the truth. It wasn't just a deal lost. It was trust, respect, reputation, things far harder to rebuild than money. Meanwhile, outside the world of corporate panic, social media burned like wildfire. Clips from guests who had been in the lobby the night before surfaced online. A shaky video showed the receptionist smirking, sliding the card back with sarcasm. Another clip caught Carter's calm voice saying, "Run the card." People watched and replayed, their anger growing with each view. Comments flooded in. How dare they treat him like that? This is why representation matters. He handled it better than I ever could. True class. They lost billions because they couldn't respect a man at the counter. The hotel's official accounts tried to post apologies, long statements filled with carefully chosen words. But it was too late. Every apology was met with fire. "Too little, too late," people replied. "You only care because you got caught." In the city, reporters gathered outside the hotel, their cameras flashing as guests walked in and out. Some refused to comment. Others shook their heads, saying they were canceling their stays. The grand chandeliers still glowed in the lobby, but the glamour was gone. What once felt untouchable now looked fragile, broken. Meanwhile, Carter's company headquarters was buzzing with energy. His team stood firmly behind his decision. Investors who respected him doubled down on their support. Messages of praise poured in from other CEOs, political leaders, and ordinary people alike. He had shown the world that no amount of money could excuse disrespect. Carter himself. He remained calm, as always. He didn't seek interviews. He didn't post statements. He didn't brag. He let the story tell itself. He knew the truth. His silence spoke louder than anything he could say. But the fallout didn't stop there. Other hotels in the chain began reporting cancellations. Celebrities who had stayed loyal for years announced publicly they would never step foot inside again. Entire conferences relocated overnight. The financial losses multiplied far beyond $2.8 billion. The name of the hotel, once a symbol of luxury, was now a global warning sign. And in every discussion, one image remained in people's minds: the calm, silent face of the man who had stood at that counter, insulted and mocked, yet never losing control. The receptionist had laughed at him. The coworker had mocked him. The manager had begged him. But in the end, it wasn't their words people remembered. It was Carter's decision. The fallout was complete. A hotel chain humiliated. A global audience awakened. And a man who had faced a lifetime of doubt proved, once again, that power is not in the noise you make but in the silence that follows your actions. Asterisk, the world did not forget. Weeks passed, but the story of what happened in that glittering hotel lobby refused to fade. Newspapers kept revisiting it, documentaries began planning to cover it, and business schools quietly started designing case studies about it. It wasn't just about a canceled deal anymore, it had grown into something much bigger. For many, the lesson was clear. Respect was not optional. Dignity was not negotiable. And prejudice, no matter how small or subtle, could destroy empires overnight. Mr. Carter himself remained quiet. He didn't go on talk shows. He didn't write articles. He didn't even comment on social media. The silence became his signature proof that he didn't need to explain his actions. His decision spoke for itself. It was simple. If you don't respect me, you don't deserve my business. And if you don't deserve my business, you don't deserve billions across the business world. Whispers turned into policies. Hotels retrained their staff. Companies re-examined how they treated their clients. Leaders reminded their teams that success was not only about money, but also about how people were treated when no one was watching. The ripple effect of that single night stretched farther than anyone had expected. The receptionist who had laughed disappeared into silence. Some said she tried to find new work, but her name was tied to the scandal. The young man beside her faded into obscurity as well. Their laughter had lasted seconds, but the consequences would follow them for a lifetime. Meanwhile, the hotel chain itself never fully recovered. The canceled deal was only the beginning. Stock prices never returned to their former glory. Investors walked away. Competitors rose in their place. Guests, once eager to book rooms under the brand's golden name, now chose other destinations. The word luxury no longer clung to their reputation, it had been replaced by disgrace. But Carter's legacy wasn't just about the downfall of a hotel. It was about something deeper. People from all walks of life, students, workers, entrepreneurs saw in his silence a kind of power they had never recognized before. He had shown them that dignity was worth more than deals, that silence could be louder than shouting, and that sometimes the greatest victories came not from fighting, but from walking away. Parents told their children. His story as a lesson: never let anyone tell you that you don't belong. And if they laugh, let your success be the answer. Professors used his example to teach that ethics and respect were as important as strategy and profit. Activists pointed to him as proof that the world could change, even in a single night, when someone refused to accept humiliation quietly. And Carter himself. He carried on as though nothing had changed. Meetings continued. Projects expanded. His company grew stronger. But those who worked close to him noticed something different in his eyes. There was a new sharpness, a new weight. He had always been powerful, but now he was also symbolic. He was no longer just a businessman. He had become a reminder, a warning, a story etched into the fabric of corporate history. His silence that night was replayed over and over, a moment frozen in time. When the world realized that the price of disrespect was not smallette, was catastrophic. Months later, as Carter stood at the balcony of one of his company's new buildings, looking over the city skyline, his assistant asked quietly, "Do you ever regret it? Walking away from that deal?" Carter's eyes stayed on the horizon. The lights of the city flickered like stars below. He didn't answer right away. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice calm and steady, just as it had been in the hotel. Money can be replaced, he said. Respect cannot. And with those words, the story was sealed not as a tale of loss, but as a tale of legacy. Because, in the end, people didn't remember the chandeliers or the marble floors of that hotel. They remembered the man who stood in silence, endured laughter, and answered an insult not with anger, but with a decision that echoed across the world. That was his true wealth. That was his true victory. And that was the legacy of the black executive who turned laughter into a $2.8 billion lesson.